Right, so Dave, I do not see.
Nicely. We're all because you could get fired. That's big for them. See, that's a big one. So.
Hey, Jennifer. Thanks for coming today. We should get started pretty quickly. It's gonna be an interesting conversation. We hope anyway. Does anybody need anything? No? Okay, perfect.
So you can actually have have your video up here or just rely on my video when you start. either way.
So turn off, I hear what you're
You turn
saying.
yours off.
That'd be
and
awesome.
Just make sure mine's in.
I was gonna say,
speaker
you're a
view.
host, so
Speaker, put it in speaker view.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're not gonna start until she goes. You're exactly right. Just gonna wait for her. Family Dollar, right across the street. It's the only thing I can do. It's all good. Right across the street. It's all good. They're already parked on the street. On this street? On the road. If you are one of those people that are illegally parked on the road out here in the fire lane, I'm going to ask you, either if you are on the panel and need your keys, one of our league members will move your vehicle, or you go out and move your vehicle over here to the Family Dollar, which is where I parked. You see a little blue Prius right over there? It's literally a walk away, but if you are not, if you're parked in the fire lane, I do need you to move. Okay? So. The fire lane, yes, yes, and I'm gonna have you in the back, you're literally gonna sit on that bench, so I can get you in that camera. Okay, so who is parked in the fire lane? Are you okay with the league member moving your car? I am fine with that. I need league members?
I'm Kristen. Nice to meet you. I did, but it just was, it was drowned in my other emails.
Can I look at them? Yes, of course.
When did you first become aware of domestic violence? Do you think it impacts you? What makes you say we can't continue to do this better? Question. What
So
would
we're
you
real
do
tight, we've got
to
3
prevent
women
it?
at the table. And I apologize for the tightness that keeps the conversation alive.
What would you do to prevent TV from implement change? What do you think you need to do to stop violence? Great. Thank you.
Deep breath, everyone. You guys, yes? Yeah? Okay. Woohoo. We're gonna wing this as we move a couple vehicles for a few minutes, okay? All right. I know Christine just left to go move a vehicle. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to pick this up too when I'm talking. I apologize, Dave, my bad. So we're going to wait for Christine to come back. I'm going to turn that down so I don't get any feedback either. Okay. Before Christine gets here, I don't really know what to do. She's starting this off. So I'm usually, again, people just tell me what to do. I just show up. Today, this is the truth, actually. I literally just showed up. I know I can. I'm pretty good at it. But we are here for a community conversation on domestic violence. And after I was promoting it for the last few days, I noticed fight domestic violence. Is that really a good term to use with regards to domestic violence? I don't know if fight was the best adjective there, but again, silence hides the violence, help end the silence was our tagline for this. So we do understand that there's a lot of embarrassment associated with this, and we do hope to kind of talk about that today and open up the discussion. We have some great panelists from Colorado Springs Police Department, El Paso County Sheriff's Department, Tessa Hasea, you are here, right? Which one you are? Yes, ma'am. Hi there. And I am saying that right? Hasea? Thank you. Okay, sorry. That was one of the ones I meant to confirm before we started, so I apologize for that. And of course, we have Ms. Kristen Faith Sharp, founder of Break the Silence, and now Boss Babe Networking. So this is her new venture, as well as Mr. Doug Miles, our former prosecutor. So Christine is back. Yay, she's going to get us started. And then we should be good to go. Yeah, we're going to scoot down. You guys just scoot on down just a little bit towards me. We're going to get nice and cozy in here. I want to make sure we see Miss Connie down there on the end. Awesome. Miss Christine, you want to take a deep breath?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Saturday, the 25th of March. So thank you everyone for coming out on this Saturday. By looks, it's beautiful. Don't believe it. It's windy out there. The roads are closed going one way from us. So thank you all for putting up with the hassles to get here. This is a very deep panel. I want you to understand how much interest there was getting you all here. I must have spoke for each of you, 2 other persons who recommended you or who wanted you here. So the community is very interested in hearing what you have to say today, so thank you. I think you just listed all your names, and I'm gonna let you.
I did not.
Oh, you did not, okay. Okay, great, then let me just say that we have a deep panel. They're gonna introduce themselves shortly. I'm Dr. Christine Hembry, event coordinator. For the last event I will be doing, I have to say it was the most complex and probably have to appreciate every person's patience. So thank you. Connie Stauffer, Liz Porter Merrill, Kristen Faith Sharp, Alyssa Bravo, Janelle Langdon Isaac, Ashley Zamora, Jennifer Arndt, Sarah Summers, Ann Markley, we moved people around, apologize, Heather Manzanilla, and Doug Miles. So they're gonna have a minute to introduce themselves. I first want to introduce you to our chief here, Shelley Roars, is going to take over. She's the moderator. She'll be asking the questions. And once again, thanks for tuning in today.
Thanks, Dr. Embry. So Christine is our events chair, and this is her last event, so we hate to lose her, but it sounds like she's moving over to advocacy, so we're not losing her totally. But again, my name is Shelley Roars. I am your league spokesperson. What is the league? I'm here to tell you just a little bit about that. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering voters and defending democracy. We are a membership organization, mostly all volunteers, except we do have a part-time administrative assistant. And we are not just for women either. We do have some male members, so thank you for that. And student membership is free. So if you know any students who are civics geeks like us in the league, and I use that term lovingly, membership is free. So see Sandra Collins here if you would like membership. Great thing about the league, again, we do not support nor endorse candidates. But we do sometimes take a stance on issues like TOPS. We do support this ballot initiative that you're seeing if you live in the city of Colorado Springs. And we also support moving our spring elections to the fall. And there's some information over on our league table if you'd like that. A couple of upcoming events for our league. If you'd like to go more information, go to lwvppr.org. We have a new and prospective member meet and greet coming up on Saturday, April 8th. Thanks to Sandra and her membership team. That's at 1 o'clock. And then our LWV PPR annual meeting. We are membership driven, so all of our members vote on the things that we discuss, including our budget and your nominees for your board. So that's what we do at our annual meeting. Saturday, April 29th from 1 to 3 p.m. at the Penrose Library. So that is basically some upcoming events for us. You're confirmed, so we're going to jump right into it. Again, you're here for your community conversation. We do this once or twice a quarter is kind of what Christine has been working on, and today is domestic violence. And we're going to give the panelists here each a couple minutes to kind of introduce themselves, the organization that they represent, and what your job is and what you kind of do around domestic violence. So we're going to start here with Jennifer, and we're going to go down to Doug, and then I did not write down, so Ashley, and then all the way down to Connie, right? So we're going to start with Jennifer, a couple minutes. Again, your timekeeper, Terry, is going to be in the front row to kind of give you a heads up when you're kind of ready to pass. But okay, and then you guys, we're going to share this mic, and then I think you're stuck under that.
My name is Detective Jennifer Arndt. I work with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. I am currently assigned to major crimes and cold cases. Prior to becoming a detective, I worked in the jail as well as doing patrol, did several other stuff such as crisis negotiations unit. Sadly, when it comes to domestic violence, by the time they come to me, their voices have probably been silenced. So I will be investigating after the fact.
My name is Sarah Summers. I'm a victim advocate with El Paso County Sheriff's Office, and we work with victims of all kinds. Domestic violence is most commonly our role that we play with the victims as far as giving them resources after the incident has immediately happened, hopefully within 24 hours, if not a couple days after. Prior to that, I was just a volunteer, and now I'm a full-time staff member.
My name is Ann Markley. I'm the CEO at TESSA. We work with individuals who have experienced domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. And we provide services in a variety of ways, all confidential. That is through our immediate Safe House program, our 24-hour Safe Line. We provide counseling, legal support, youth and children's programming, and housing support as well for utilities and rental assistance. Our human trafficking program does the same to support any individuals within those areas as well. We work very closely with our law enforcement partners to make sure that we're supporting our community of survivors. And
My name is Heather Manzanilla. I'm the Victim Advocacy Coordinator with the Colorado Springs Police Department, and our team are emergency crisis responders. So we are 24/7 on call. We respond on scene with the officers to provide safe housing, to figure out safe planning with them, medical support, whatever's needed for those victims. And then we follow up for around a year or so with every victim just to make sure that they are still getting the supports that they need and connecting to whatever community resources are needed, like Tessa and a lot of the people in this room.
My name is Doug Miles. I'm currently a senior judge, senior county court judge. I retired about a year ago when I hit the age limit. I was a county court judge for 11 years. I have been involved in domestic violence for 35 plus years. I started and presided over the domestic violence court here in El Paso County. And I presided over that for about 10 years. Before that, I was a prosecutor specializing in the prosecution of domestic violence. And currently, I'm, as I said, senior judge. I'm also the chair of the El Paso County Domestic Violence Task Force, and working on a couple of grants to do judicial education on domestic violence. And before all that, I was a middle school teacher. So, I've been asked that before, and what I've realized is that when I became a prosecutor, dealing with criminals is way easier than dealing with junior high kids. So.
I'm Detective Ashley Zamora. I'm with the Colorado Springs Police Department. I'm currently assigned to our Domestic Violence and Adult Sex Assault Unit. Prior to that, I worked patrol for 4.5 years, and then I was a dispatcher with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office and Fountain Police Department. Currently, my role is to investigate the reports further after patrol has responded and initiated a report. We work with our victim advocacy unit to make sure the victims are getting support while they're going through the process with us.
Good afternoon. My name is Janelle Langdon Isaac. I'm also with the Colorado Springs Police Department Domestic Violence Adult Sex Assault Unit. I've been in law enforcement for 7 years. I've been in this particular unit for 3. I'm also active currently with the Domestic Violence Court Program, as well as DV Task Force within our community.
Hello, my name is Alyssa Bravo. I'm with HACIA Advocate Program. We do advocacy for Native survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking here in El Paso County. We also have a newish men's program called Empowered, and we help with a wide range of advocacy. So we are community-based advocates. We can help with, I know. Right here? Okay. We can help with court accompaniments, public benefits, or getting transportations to and from places, as long as it goes back to the initial domestic violence or the initial incident. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Faith. I wear a lot of hats in the community, and prior to the hat that I'm wearing today, I created a domestic violence nonprofit by the name of Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence after I left an abusive relationship. I also grew up with DV. So when creating this organization, I wanted to do everything that I could that I needed when I was in that situation to help survivors that were just like me. It's such an honor to be a part of this panel with all of you, because I genuinely feel that together we can end this issue. The hat that I wear now is I have a public relations company as well as a nonprofit consulting company to help domestic violence nonprofits across the country learn how to reach more people and advocate differently online, as well as helping them raise money for their programs and their mission. I also have a company called Boss Babe Networking, which is a community for women to feel empowered. I genuinely feel that when women or people in general are more empowered, they're less likely to fall victim. So I bring a different approach, but I'm, again, so honored to be here, and thank you so much, Shelley, for the invite.
Hi, my name is Liz Porter-Merrill. I go by she or they pronouns, and I am from the State Public Defender's Office. That's one of the many hats I wear. I'm also the public defender representative on the State Restorative Justice Council. As a member of the State Restorative Justice Council, I'm also a part of a public defender, prosecutor, restorative justice team that is tasked with expanding the use of restorative justice throughout the criminal legal system and beyond to help people explore dialogue and healing processes. And specific with respect to domestic violence, we have a lot of opportunities around restorative justice all across the country, but in particularly in Colorado. There are opportunities for support circles, for dialogue for survivors of sexual harm and interpersonal violence. And there are a lot of other ways that we can use restorative justice to offer people healing and a path forward. Consent and education, boundary education, empowerment, like the other panelists have talked about, are really powerful tools as well. And one of my very favorite projects that I am involved in right now is working as a consultant with Project Elevate, which is a community reentry program for women who have been incarcerated. And many of those women, if not all of them, are survivors of sexual violence or interpersonal violence, domestic violence, some sort of harm. And so getting to work with those women day in and day out, exploring other ways of being where we are supporting each other and talking about things is a really beautiful practice. And I love working with those women so much. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here.
Hi, my name is Connie Stauffer, and right now I'm currently affiliated with Restorative Justice in the Southern Colorado area, and also a presenter for the Human Trafficking Task Force of Southern Colorado. I've just started working with them as well, especially with a passion to educate schools and churches for sexual exploitation of youth. But my background, which brings me really probably more here today a lot with, is 21 years working as a victim advocate, working with domestic violence victims, and that is in many various states. Started in California, went to actually South Carolina after that, North Carolina, back to California, then to Utah, and then to Colorado. So I've had the honor of being a part of a lot of task force, seeing a lot of different, quote, laws, statutes, things that's worked, and unfortunately things that probably haven't worked well. I've been honored to be able to serve so many victims survivors of domestic violence and their journeys into empowerment and surviving, I'll be gentle with this, through the system that they have to kind of work through, and what is the right or wrongs and better ways of meeting them where they're at. So it's an honor to be here today. And I'm going to put this, my honor of being here is on behalf of each one of those survivors that I sat across from and looked into their eyes and watched them journey through different aspects, and each of them so unique. So that's the other thing, trying to box this up is really hard, in all defense of everybody that's here, everybody knows that. How boxed we put this in and say this is what it looks like. So again, on behalf of them, it is an honor to be here, and I appreciate each and every one of you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for that introduction. It's just a little snapshot of what you do, so we do appreciate you. We're going to get to know you a little bit more here. And I think Liz was the one that mentioned a beautiful practice. This is exactly the beautiful practice that I think we strive for as the League, is just these conversations that are just, you wouldn't think about the League, but except for voting, but this is one of those issues that we take a stance on. We don't take a stance on, but we want to talk more about. So thank you for those introductions. This discussion, as you're going to hear from our panelists, is from the victim side, it's from the advocate side who's helping the victims, and it's also from the police side. So a lot of people know that this exists. Again, there's just a disconnect of talking about it and how it's handled. So we do hope we can get better, and instead of just recognizing the problem, how we can do better in our own lives. So thank you for this conversation. League of Women Voters positions does not have a position that we could find on domestic violence per se, but we do have positions on gun violence prevention. On public safety, it is ensuring the protection of the public by safeguarding people from crimes, disaster, and other potential dangers and threats. On gun control or gun safety, our stance is we must address the dangers of gun violence and enact comprehensive legislation towards gun reform. And this discussion kind of goes around that, because I think we will get into that a little bit later about what that looks like for us. Local statistics, these are Colorado. 88% of domestic violence victims were identified as female. 90% of the perpetrators are identified as male. 81% of the deaths result from gunshot wounds. Just more than half of the fatalities involved were couples who were currently or formerly dating, while 48% were among married couples. A little more than 1/4 of those couples were broken up or estranged at the time of the homicide. Among the challenges presented by the 2021 case is that there is a domestic violence fatality review board. They distributed a survey report in January of 2023. Among the challenges in that report presented by 2021 cases that the board found is the indication that it intended to that the board will continue to wrestle with regarding domestic violence is the indication actions intended to protect victims of domestic violence can actually prompt perpetrators in some cases. So basically what I understood that as, if the perpetrator gets notification that his ex-girlfriend has put an order of protection against him, they are finding that sometimes that tends to set someone off. And those numbers tend to be a bit higher. A perpetrator who is aware of, and that's where it is, if they're aware of pending legal action related to prior acts, they can escalate existing patterns of abuse. This is particularly true where a perpetrator faces significant legal consequences. The annual report that we found points to, as well from January 2023, points to the COVID-19 pandemic as one likely driver of increases in domestic violence killings. Several recommendations from this report, and then we're going to get to these specific questions. One recommendation, judicial officers receive more specific training in the social science behind domestic violence in order to craft sentences that may help prevent future incidents. They also recommend that the Attorney General's office be made a clearinghouse to collect data on domestic violence fatalities from local law enforcement. So that's going to be one of my questions if we participate in that kind of clearinghouse information. And then finally, the report recommends that our legislature help fund firearms relinquishment positions to better enforce Colorado law requiring individuals subject to a domestic violence protection order to surrender their firearms. So again, that was an annual report from the Colorado Domestic Violence Fatality Review Board distributed in January of 2023. So we're going to jump right into some questions, unless those are some statistics we're going to get to as well. And I'm going to ask this of everyone on the panel, so everyone's going to get to talk on this one. I know. And I'm used to I'm sorry, we've had 5 forums in the last few weeks, so I'm used to putting candidates on the seat for 30 seconds to 1 minute to answer. But this one should be pretty top of mind for you. Okay, if you know, what do you think we need to do, right? Just one thing that you think from your perspective in your role, what is one thing that we need to do to stop the violence? One great idea, okay? No, I'll tell you, no, that's chaos in my world, Miss Kristen. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go first. Detective Ashley Zamora, you're right here to my right. Detective, again, just really quick, one thing that you think we could do to stop the violence.
I think that having a stricter punishment for people who are repeatedly violating protection orders would be very big.
Okay, thank you. Detective Janelle Langdon Isaac.
I think something that we look at in domestic violence court is kind of the deeper issues, mental health, substance abuse issues, and I think that that's something that does help with stopping the cycle of violence.
Okay. Sarah Summers. I know I'm jumping around here a bit, but my names are different, but I'm going to go to Sarah Summers on this one.
I would say more resources that are readily available. We have great resources in our community, but they're not necessarily, like, housing is a huge one that we see and we struggle with all the time with our victims. Like, they want to get out, but they can't. So that's definitely one thing that we could improve on.
Thank you, ma'am. Ann Markley.
I think from my perspective, it's really just raising the awareness in the community, and it's things like this, keeping the conversation going. The more people know that this is an issue that can be talked about, and the more people that know that there are places to go, I think we can affect change in that way.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Kristen.
I'm ready. I think the biggest thing that's often missing when it comes to advocacy is education. I think that there are a lot of young people growing up not understanding what's healthy or unhealthy in relationships, their parents not knowing what's healthy or unhealthy, therefore the cycle continues. And also on the flip side, there aren't enough resources for people who perpetrate abuse. And I think that we as a community need to do a better job at addressing that issue. Not a lot of DV organizations want to champion helping offenders because they help victims. But honestly, we're missing a huge population that needs the same support and resources and education, just like survivors and victims do.
Thank you, Kristen. Alyssa Bravo.
Kind of on the same note, it's education. When I think a lot of, for me, for instance, when I was what I was exposed to DV, it was within the home. And then kind of as a teenager, things that are red flags are not being discussed in our teenagers. You know, having your passwords, having your locations, all of these really harmful things that are going on as teenagers are really grooming these kids to be grown up. And, you know, it just starts like that. And then before you know it, you're in a full-blown DV situation and you don't know how to ask for help. You don't have the terminology to understand that these are the kind of the power and control things that are taking place. And to kind of go off of what she had said, our program actually does have a men's program where we do offer services for Native men specifically who are working to kind of heal in their own way, but it doesn't discriminate for those who have previously perpetrated. So, thank you.
Mr. Doug Miles. Followed by Liz Porter, so we're sharing, so that way you can prep kind of who's coming up next before this one.
I think what we need to see is more consistent and proactive support for DV victims. I know the victim advocates do a great job. I don't think attorneys in the system do a great job of continuing communication with victims throughout the criminal process. So I think we need to engage with victims more. Prosecutors need to engage more and more consistently and regularly, not just at the beginning of the case and the end of the case. And I also agree, because I started the DV court program, that resources for perpetrators as well. You know, changing behavior, perpetrator behavior is a long-term process. It takes time and it takes resources.
Thank you, Mr. Miles. Liz Porter Merrill, please, and then Connie.
Yeah, so I will echo a couple things that others have said. I really believe this starts this is everywhere, in our families, in our homes, in our relationships with everyone we are in relationship with. It starts with education around consent and boundaries and power dynamics and how we deal with that, having greater awareness around what that looks like, educating kids so that they know what consent looks like. Educating them around boundaries so they can be clear about the boundaries that they need for their own body integrity and integrity generally. I think we need to have more conversations about domestic violence, about power dynamics generally, about all these things, consent, boundaries. I think that it is really powerful to have those conversations among people who have caused harm. I think that when we have people who've caused harm heal, that is the most powerful way for us to show transformation possible. And then those people who have healed themselves from the harm that they have caused can show others how to heal. I think that we really need to lean into compassionate accountability, so support and accountability. Accountability not just about punishment, but accountability about creating spaces and conditions in which people want to hold themselves accountable for the harm that they cause in the world. And this goes well beyond domestic violence. There's so much more about all of this that we need to work on in our culture, right? So I really appreciate the pieces about also supporting the people who've caused harm so that they know that they can never do it again, right? It's about changing and transforming our lives.
And Connie.
And commending everything that's been said, you guys have all definitely points on the picture, and coming from different states and different perspectives. I think the thing that was most frustrating coming from a victim service perspective was a lack of collaborations between everyone, you know, especially the system, nonprofits. DV particularly, because when I started in the field, it was right ground level when they were really pushing to, we got to get the statutes passed, we got to get DV, victims don't want to come forward. That was the push. So, you know, that whole sense of, okay, we're putting the perpetrator over here, we're going to put the victim over here, and then nobody's going to talk, including even agencies. It just became this division. So meanwhile, everything we're talking about, lack of communication, ability to work through, understanding, all that, just kind of, when it hit our system, really turned into a lot of that kind of divide and conquer a little bit too much, I think. And I'm going to put this out here just for being in different states, because I have seen that as being an issue, quote, on behalf of victims. The Colorado does not have its own DV statute per se. It's an enhancer. I heard many when I was at Aurora Police Department, some at El Paso as well, say to me, I'm not calling the cops anymore. They don't do anything when they get here. You know, coming from states where there was actually a statute where it was cut dry, and I don't want to go into this too much, but where law enforcement could basically go in and say, okay, I don't have to wait for somebody to get hit. I got enough on a primary aggressor that I can and shall arrest on this. And I think it left it a little bit blurry without that statute and enhancer, where there's not enough, quote, for law enforcement sometimes to take action. And I'll stop because I could keep going on that.
No,
but,
that's
yeah.
good.
So,
Thank
but
you.
I definitely seen there that has been a disadvantage a lot here in Colorado.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry? Sergeant Art, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, Detective, sorry, Detective Jennifer Arndt. Yeah, where did I miss that one?
Thanks for the promotion. I piggyback on a lot of what these ladies said, but I think education is just huge. A lot of these, they learn it from the home, they learn it from their parents. They don't understand the boundaries, but educating everybody in general too, so people that do see it, they recognize it earlier if somebody is involved. Families recognize it with another family member. So understanding what those cues are that they're seeing, those red flags that are out there, so that things can get reported earlier, because a lot of times it gets so far down, they feel they can never get out. It just becomes too overwhelming, and it takes a lot longer and many years to hopefully get these people out of that situation.
So that was kind of a softball lob question. I was hoping everybody knew what they wanted to do. And it's going to be more of a discussion back and forth between panelists rather than me asking you questions and going one by one. So we are going to kind of, know that we want you to answer in a couple minutes or less with regards to our questions, but know that it's also going to be maybe some specifically to the police departments, because we do have a couple questions regarding some red flag laws. But based on what you just heard from each of you about what you thought we could do better, let's take that into a little bit more. What makes you say, can't we do this better? Is there something holding you back with regards to your positions, or is it money? Is it the law, right? What is it that makes you say, can't we do this better? Is there an incident that made you question our present domestic violence response? Like there's something that maybe top of mind kind of thing that you can remember. But again, what makes you say, again, I'm going to point to you, Connie, down on the end, is it that law, right? That we need a little bit more of a stronger law that makes you say, can't we do this better? So again, I'm just going to kind of open it up to you guys, and whoever wants to go ahead, Ms. Connie.
Well, and I guess just to elaborate a little bit more on it, I mean, the law is, in fact, when I went through the first training, when I got to Colorado and found out there wasn't a statute, I went to my supervisor and I said, did I hear that right? There's no DV statute. She said, yeah, there isn't. It's an enhancer. So, I mean, I think, there's nothing that's been perfect in all my journeys through all the states. There isn't. But I just think it's one more thing that leaves it gray for first responders all the way around, whether that's the officer going, okay, do I have enough? So I think it blurs it where we're already in. And I think what's really being said here, because Jennifer said it really well, by the time officers usually arrive, this isn't usually a first time issue. And officers have said that to me when I did ride-alongs in California. It was like, yeah, I'm glad the statute's here now because I don't have to keep going back to this house that I've been separating these two couples for years. Now I can just say, you're going to jail. And so they cleaned it up. So I'm going to quote an officer's response to that, as opposed to, I don't have enough. There's nothing broken. I could elaborate a lot on personal things of that, but I think it would just be at that start. But I'm willing to backtrack on that prevention piece as well. So in education, but once it hits the system.
There is a domestic violence law in Colorado. So when you say we need a domestic violence law, can you explain what you mean? Because we have what kind of is colloquially referred to as a domestic violence tag. Any crime, if it's violence or threat of violence against an intimate partner, or any other crime, if it's used for retaliation, control, revenge, anything can be a domestic violence. You can have a domestic violence careless driving if you're trying to run your intimate partner off the road. So there is a law. I'm curious as to, can you explain a little bit when you say we need a law?
Yeah, I should. Thank you, Doug, and I appreciate your input on that, because coming from a quote victim advocate standpoint and education wise was what I was referring to is states like California, other states I've been in, domestic and family violence were its own statute. It was a statute on its own. It was its own. It didn't. So my understanding is in Colorado, it goes in as everything you're saying is correct, but it goes in as an enhancer to a crime that's something else that's been committed, as opposed to an officer would do that in California. So I don't have to have proof that there was actually a bruise on this lady where something was broke, male, female, to substantiate that I can do an arrest. So that's what I'm referring to, is more on the law enforcement perspective. I know once it hits the system, there are charges for domestic violence, so you're definitely correct on that, Doug. But I think that's starting, that's what my perspective was as far as, yeah, if it's an enhancer, and I heard officers say that, they show up, they don't have enough to really, yeah, it looks like it's a primary aggressor, but I don't have another thing. I don't have assault, there's no broken objects, and that's what I heard from law enforcement on first responder.
Can we get a clarification from our law enforcement on whether or not that is the case, please?
So our domestic violence statute, it does say that we shall arrest, but what we have to have is probable cause. So when we show up, what we need to prove is that first and foremost, there was an intimate relationship and that a crime occurred, like Judge Miles said, as a form of coercion, control, power, intimidation, revenge. So we have to look at those things. And that sometimes bruises need to be there, but that's like any crime. We have to take a little bit more because we don't want to arrest people simply because we showed up. And I'm sure that in California, that's the same. It's not just because they're called, someone's going to be arrested. So there are things that could definitely be better, but the way that our domestic violence is worded now, we are instructed we shall arrest within a domestic violence situation if we have probable cause. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. What was your first sign? Yeah, I appreciate it because the clarification on it. And again, I'm coming from a victim services perspective, but my thought, the snag that happened, and even Aurora, I'd asked the questions was, that based on I do have a probable cause, that I have a primary aggressor was enough really to do arrests in California outside of having to have another crime. That's what I was educated. Like there still had to be something else, kind of like what you said. So yeah, coercion, something to substantiate, which got a little bit more blurred, where proactively, where the statute stated differently, no, I am as an officer can and shall arrest based on I determine this person's a primary aggressor. I even had a late report that came in. A lady, it was 4 days later. He wasn't even on scene. And just based on what she said, he was able to go out and arrest. So I don't know if that helps a little. It seemed like there was just a little bit of a blur, especially at Aurora when I watched it all of a sudden, where an officer really was limited on what they could or couldn't do.
And even if it is a few days later, if we are able to gather enough evidence, and that can look a lot of different ways. If there's outcry witnesses, because we know that domestic violence victims don't always report to us immediately. So our hands aren't necessarily tied. If we're able to show up, we do make the arrest, and that our statute supports us within that.
Can you clarify what the statute is? So is it domestic violence, literally a statute? Is that changed in the last few years, or is that?
It's been in effect since the mid-90s.
Okay, so is it listed as a separate statute? Because my understanding when I looked it up, it wasn't its own statute.
18601.
And it's, okay, perfect, Doug.
My boys are coming out.
Right? Amen to
That's
that.
right. I knew it.
I was gonna say, I need a microphone down there, if you could, please.
Somebody else, I don't want to interrupt. The concept behind the Colorado statute was there are a lot of states that have a crime of domestic violence. It's basically an assault crime between intimate partners. What the legislature determined in our state was assault is not the only way domestic violence occurs. It occurs through damage to property. It occurs through threats. It occurs through false imprisonment. It occurs through all kinds of things. And so what law enforcement, and it is a big challenge for law enforcement, but if it's a violence or threat of violence, that's pretty much the end of and it's an intimate partner, that's the end of the inquiry. We also, by the way, do have predominant aggressor in that statute. There are 4 factors that law enforcement is supposed to consider. prior criminal history, relative nature of the injury. There's 4 things, I won't go into all of those, but it is a separate statute, very extensive statute. It also created the Domestic Violence Offender Management Board and mandatory domestic violence counseling for anybody who's convicted of a domestic violence crime. My personal perspective is the statute is probably overbroad, because we end up arresting, and they have to, but we end up arresting victims who are reacting to being abused. They're probably reacting in a way that's not appropriate and maybe even criminal. But in my own personal view is those shouldn't be treated the same as a perpetrator, an initial aggressor. We have people, there are different categories. One of the things we did when I was in the DA's office was to create a contextual analysis to look at those and see if this is a case that belongs in the criminal justice system. So it casts a very broad net. And a lot of those cases are not sort of the batterer, power control dominant kind of person we think of when we think of a domestic violence batterer. So.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Yes, ma'am.
I do.
Go ahead.
I think one of the things that we are missing as advocates, and I used to paint this picture with young kids and even adults to understand this issue that we call DV. I'm a foodie, so I like to make my analogies food-based. So I like to see it as one slice of the bread is the education, the empowerment, the what do we do before this happens to educate people about the boundaries and all that good stuff. But then what's often categorized as DV is the work that many of these institutions do here. DV already happened, the legal support system, the police department, all of those resources are reactionary to DV, and they do incredible work. We need you all in order to help fight the justice, or sometimes the justice doesn't happen to victims and survivors of DV. And then there's the after effect, the empowerment, the healing. How do we break the cycle? How do we end this issue that we call DV? And so in order to make a sandwich, you need all of those pieces, or else your sandwich is just the meat and the lettuce on the inside. And so yes, it's the collaboration. When I moved here about 5 years ago with my nonprofit, I didn't have the opportunity to collaborate with many institutions because they're like, you're new here, we don't want to help you, you don't do what we do, or you're a competition for us. And for me, as the founder of this DV organization and also a survivor, my mind went, well, why wouldn't you want to collaborate if we don't do the same thing? So many of these institutions do different things, but why is it, just like you said, I've been to Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, all these different states, and all of these advocates are saying the same freaking thing. No organizations want to work together. Why? We're not fighting for the same dollars. If money is the issue, then let's talk about how we can fundraise differently as nonprofits. And that's where I come with my nonprofit consultant hat, is how we can raise money on autopilot. I did it. I was raising about $20,000 per month during the pandemic, so money wasn't an issue. It wasn't the reason why we couldn't collaborate. So why is it that DV organizations can't collaborate? Why isn't that we don't have enough resources on the front end to make sure that, I know a lot of you already answered this, is that we're helping, the victims after the crime has been committed. But I had the opportunity to work with an organization here locally that's helping kids who are in high school and on probation. What are we doing for those kids? What are we doing for those kids who are perpetrating abuse at 10, 12, 13 years old? What are we doing for them and their parents to help them educate their family? How are we supporting their family so those young kids don't grow up to become perpetrators that are having to work with you or having to work with you? What are we doing for those kids so they don't grow up like me with DV and thinking it's normal? That's why I fell victim, because I didn't have the resources and my parents didn't have the education to understand that, what's happening at your home is 100% going to affect your children and their children. So I feel like the question was, can we do better? 100%. Just because it didn't work in the past doesn't mean we have to do the same thing. And if the wheel doesn't work, or whatever the analogy for that is, then we can fix it. It's not too late. We can bring ideas, we can bring fresh ideas to the table so we all can thrive as a community. When I found out 5 years ago how DV was such a huge issue here, that was one of the biggest reasons why I moved here, to champion this issue alongside many of you. Together, we can't do it by ourselves, but together we can move mountains. And I think that collaboration and all those other things that I just said, if we literally create a plan on how we're gonna do it, I know we can end this issue. So I'm gonna go ahead and mic drop now.
Create a plan.
I'm
We'd
gonna
love to
pick
help
it
with
up.
that plan. Yes, ma'am, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would want to build on Kristen, right? What Kristen was talking about. So there's a public health model that we can use to sort of think about this. And tier 1 is prevention, right? In universal supports, we have the highest amount of supports and we should be investing the most amount of money into those prevention piece. Then we have the second tier, which is like intervention or I think public health people might have different labels for these, but this is my version. Intervention, and then at the top, the like real horrible conflict. That's where we can have the power to transform situations, right? So I love the sandwich analogy, and I'm just gonna add it in a public health model kind of way, framework to use that. I wanna echo the value alignment. I think we need to figure out how to collaborate based on value alignment in our society. We have compartmentalized things far too much, especially in systems in our culture. And if we start breaking down those barriers and start having conversations like this is allowing us to, we can start finding those people that have the same values and alignment as us. Connie is a great example, right? Like, I'm a public defender. Most of you, I mean, I even got a comment in here like, oh, you represent the bad guys. Connie represents victims. We can find alignment. We can find something between the two of us that we can share. We both want to help people who've been harmed heal. And so you find those people, you find your value alignment, and then we start building together. And I agree. I think with Kristen, we have the power to change everything here. And one last thing I want to say is we need to model love. Healthy, beautiful, dynamic love. We don't have very good models of love in this culture in our society. And I think that is part of the basis why we struggle so much around boundaries and consent and those pieces that we need to build up and practice and get those muscles strong so we can show what love really, truly, healthy, true love is.
It's a good place to end on love. It's a nice place. I like it. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to turn a little opposite of the love. I apologize for that. It didn't flow very well. I'm sorry. Okay, so to the officers here, right? This specific question is for you. I knew we were going to get to it. Red flag laws, right? In our county. How often is it used in domestic violence cases? Can you kind of give me a little bit there? How often are we used there? Anytime? All the time? How many times has it been used in the last year? I'm handing it over.
Well, I can say that I've never used the red flag law. I know some officers have. It's actually very difficult for officers to do and get. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of things to do with the Constitution. I think I've only actually heard of it maybe used once or twice. It's not a common thing because it's actually a very difficult process.
I was going to say, so if that's the case, my next question then is, should it be used more often? Even if it is, I know if it's difficult, but should it be used more often if that's the case?
I think when it comes to domestic violence in our laws with the protection order, they are required to render their guns away. So that's already in there in the protection order. Once they have been charged in courts, the judge will advise them, you must give up your guns. So I think that would be redundant, to tell you the truth, to then say, okay, now we're going to go do it again, because it's actually already in the protection order.
Can I go out and buy a gun? Even if that protection order is there, I can't go out and buy a gun either if I've had that against me? No. What if I go to a different state? Is there a national MAC database that puts me on that list, or can I go right across to one state over and get a gun?
There is a federal database, but and of course this is the whole gun issue. you can probably go, you go to a gun dealer where there's a background check required, there's probably, the protection order is going to pop up and they'll prevent you from buying it. But you can go to a gun show because they don't have to do a background check. So, you know, these are the same sorts of things have been debated in Congress for years now. But a red flag law, which basically you have to determine whoever's going to request it, and it's pretty much law enforcement. And by the way, there are a number of sheriffs, elected sheriffs around the state who believe it's unconstitutional and won't enforce it. The standard is danger to self or others. But if you've got probable cause for a DV charge, you've pretty much already got that. It is mandatory arrest in this jurisdiction. So that person's going to be arrested, taken to jail, and they can't even bond out until they acknowledge that protection order, which then does go into the system. So, but yeah, there's ways around it, sure.
So we are communicating and participating in a national database. Is that what I hear? Perfect. Thank you. Go ahead, Christine.
So the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, on its review of Colorado, did say that we were underutilizing our red flag law, and that we were one of the few states who was actually in possession of such a law and completely underutilizing it. So,
But if it's repetitious in this instance, I hear that it's not needed. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that correct from the panel? Okay, so it's
well, what they were saying was that defendants that are brought into the jailhouses are released, and they are not followed up at that point to whether or not they have firearms in the home, and that we could do a better job at that point.
Yeah, what the way that works, and I hate to keep interrupting on this, but it's procedure. What happens is you can't force someone to relinquish their weapon if they're still in custody. And oftentimes, part of the protection order is they can't go back to the house where the gun is. So you get these restrictions, all of which on their own sound really great, but then they begin to conflict with each other. But the procedure here in the 4th Judicial District is that you, at your next appearance in front of your, which is usually a week away, once you bond out, and you bond out, your next appearance, bring in a, so that's the way it works. The police do not take the weapon at the scene.
I do have a question on that too, Doug, because I unfortunately, even going through fast track court with victims here, other states as well too, but in other states have been sometimes more proactive at making sure that gun is relinquished. I unfortunately seen too often where, it would be that affidavit you're talking about too often was, well, yeah, I'm going to give it to a relative, but I didn't always see, and I don't know if you can enlighten me more on it, I appreciate it, but I did never really see that it was actually literally enforced that, yes, law enforcement, California, they were very proactive. I mean, they got the guns. So, and they had to turn them in one way or the other. I'll end this on a great Southern aspect, but I was in a magistrate court in the South. You'll appreciate this, Doug. So we actually had a case where this guy, the quote perpetrator, had been shooting around the shelter, found out where his significant other was, started shooting around it. So went to court. The comment was from the magistrate judge was, I can't take away that gun from that man because I know his daddy's daddy and I will not take that gun away from him. So, I've seen one end of the spectrum to the other, and I'll defense Doug, but even here in El Paso, it just seemed like there was a little bit of, are the guns really being picked up? Are they really getting the guns? Because most often it seemed like they weren't. Like, yeah, the uncle's got it, was turned over to my uncle, but do we have proof that your uncle's got it? So if you can enlighten me on that, I'd appreciate it if you have anybody does on that. Yeah, thank you. Ashley.
Well, what I can say is that protection order does tell them that they have to relinquish their guns, and they are required at their next appearance to bring an affidavit showing they did that. Now, part of that is that sometimes people don't show up for that first appearance, and then therefore we can't verify the guns are taken, and usually a warrant is issued. But if the person with that protection order, which is there until the disposition of the case or unless it's made permanent, if they're found to be in possession of a weapon, that's another violation that they're immediately arrested for and taken back, whether the victim or survivor is with them or not. They're still, and then that gun is taken then as evidence, but it's part of the process of finding them with that gun in violation of that protection order. And so I think that that's something that we are doing that is proactive as far as trying to remove, but it is hard if people don't show up to that first appearance. And so working with probation, parole, making sure that people are actually doing the steps to follow through on their court process.
No, I appreciate that, because I mean, I did see that too. I think when it came down to actually, if there was another quote incident and they were caught with a gun, they did apprehend it. And I'm going to lead a little bit too, because I've seen different states I've been in. Doug, what you said, I mean, it depends state and culturally state. What's going on in the states? What are perceptions of it's okay to have a gun or not? So I mean, that's obviously affected, and it has affected Colorado to a degree, I think. Like you said, some sheriffs, some departments don't think it's okay to confiscate guns. So, I mean, I think we kind of bounce here a little bit in Colorado.
All right, so thank you for the information on that. I did not know that process, so I appreciate that. Also, another question for detectives and officers, please. You guys get called out. I know most of you are kind of on the back end, but those that were in patrol, if you were, how much training do you have as officers related to this specific issue regarding domestic violence? Go ahead.
Heather, go ahead. So, can you hear me? So with that, I think that our department is doing a better job of getting more regular training on domestic violence and requiring that training more often. So we do have neurobiology of trauma training, domestic violence training on the victim side, and being more victim-centered and trauma-informed. And then a big push the department for CSPD at least has had is making sure all officers are trauma-informed, whether that's with victims or with offenders or whomever that's with. But I do think that that's something that's become more of a regular occurrence and a required occurrence that's happening every year to every single officer.
Again, then what are they doing every year?
The training, the mandatory training for domestic violence or trauma-informed, victim-centered.
How many hours does that look like per year? Is that, I mean, I got 12 CE credits just as a realtor. Curious as to what you need. I'm serious. Seriously. I'm totally serious.
So our initial academy, we have thousands of hours of training. And then we have,
Violence? Well,
not specific to domestic violence, I would say at least a few hundred of that is statute, how we arrive, how we respond to domestic violence. So in some form, hundreds of hours of that at least are domestic violence. And then, like Heather was saying, we have yearly trainings, and that includes different things like being trauma-informed, crisis intervention training, which, you know, is multifaceted, and it helps us with domestic violence response as well. So I would say that, yeah, we have a very large foundation. It's hard to say a specific number, but it's a lot.
And when you say we, are you talking detectives or are you talking we? In uniform?
That's the department in general does that. And then our department, I think, does a really good job of offering additional trainings and the opportunity to go to those trainings. And that's open to both detectives and patrol officers, as well as other detectives and victim advocates. And so I would say, since becoming a detective, because I've only been 6 months now, I've been to probably, I want to say, close to 100 hours of training just in 6 months to enhance domestic violence investigations. And so that's something that's been offered to us as detectives, but we have patrol officers that also attend, and then we do training to help on patrol. We have subject matter experts that actually investigate the misdemeanor domestic violence cases further, and those officers have additional specific training outside of those thousands of hours that's initially given to every officer in the department.
And sorry, also just to add to that, we do make an effort, just as our team being specialists in domestic violence, we try and go out to the patrol divisions and speak with officers per shift and answer questions. And we keep each other fresh and informed on domestic violence as well.
And I was going to say, from the victim services side, we are certainly seeing the fruits of their labor. We are definitely seeing the training in effect and the more trauma-informed response. And so we at TESSA and what we see our victims going through are incredibly pleased with the level of training that PD is starting to receive, and being able to see that experience and that shift in what our victims are seeing in our community. So thank you for that.
And sorry, not to throw you under the bus, but when you had asked the question initially, Jennifer had said so long ago, and then you two keep saying you have that opportunity. So is this a mandatory training? And then does that also include same-sex relations?
So to clarify though, we're on different. So they specifically do domestic violence education. I did domestic violence education as well too, but when you're talking about the academy and being on patrol, that's been a while for me. I've been with our office for 15 years. We do still do a lot of trauma informed, whether they say domestic violence, it's trauma informed across the board. And they relate to all sorts of different scenarios that law enforcement's coming across, mental health, domestic violence, because it's all intertwined. They're all very much intertwined together. For me, it's because I'm kind of removed from that domestic, so I'm kind of behind it because I actually do cold cases and homicide, so my training might be it's going to look somewhat different than theirs. But yes, our department still does it. It's going to be a little bit different for us.
Because they're different agencies, just to clarify. Okay.
Is there an attempt when the call comes in to have the people who take in the calls, the 911, well, I'll speak to that, but to have your unit respond versus a detective who has not had training in recent years?
So patrol always responds first. They triage situations, and our unit specifically comes out when it's a higher level investigation, if it's a more complex scene. So we don't go out on every call, just resources would limit that, but patrol triages, and then it goes through chain of command. And if it's an appropriate call that we would be helpful, absolutely we respond. We're on call every other week, so.
And in regard to that, in my deep hours of talking to people on the phone, getting you all here, some communities are using alternative response sources. The STAR response up in Denver does not do domestic violence. I'm not saying that they do, but there are other alternative response programs across the country, and I think Connie even maybe has some experience with them. That happens because they don't dial a 911 often. And that seems to be what we don't have in this community, and we don't sound like we're even close to that yet. But it's a big step for a community to take, is to create another pathway for people in distress, in domestic distress, to have a way to reach a mental health outlet that becomes a pathway for response. So if anyone has any experience with their Dasher is one, STAR, there's one in Mental Health First in Oakland, California, they have one. So if anyone has any experience, you might want to talk about how the access, that first dialing might change how we deal with this.
So I think for CSPD, we used to have DIVERT, which was specific to domestic violence, and that included community agencies. I think now we've shifted more to a model with more mental health and social work involved with law enforcement. So we have crisis response teams within law enforcement that are all the time, and any officer or any person could call them out. So for our department, you could respond without a criminal component or a criminal like allegation, and they could be in contact with a mental health professional in person on scene without needing that piece. We also, our DVSME program, the subject matter experts for the misdemeanors, that's shifting to a more proactive model so that they can continue to proactively reach out to victims again after the initial crime to try and stop further crimes, or at least to see how victims are doing, or if after the trauma has settled a little bit, what else is in existence. So I think that they're trying to shift to a more proactive model, but it's hard with law enforcement right now, and trying to be fully staffed. The other thing CSPD has is the victim advocates. We respond on every felony DV. It's a mandatory response for us to come out on scene. If we don't respond, even if they're not felonies or misdemeanors or anything like that, we're able to respond on all of those. So anytime a victim would like more resources, which could be the mental health piece, we can respond and offer that immediately on scene to victims as well. And I think the sheriff's office has that same model.
I can speak a little bit to that. So I think that there are ways that we can start building up alternatives to always engaging in punitive consequences, if that makes sense. And so one of the things that I really love about the STAR program and Dasher and some of the work that they're doing across the state is they're trying to build up those mental health first responders, right? Those first responses. And one thing that I have been doing with my prosecutor partner across the state of Colorado is also building up restorative justice and transformative justice responses and education and helping people, victim advocacy organizations across the state recognize what resources are available out there so that they can help educate and inform people who've been harmed about what resources other than just punitive outcomes are available. And that has been a really fabulous journey for me, frankly. One organization that I have done some training with is Blue Bench. And Blue Bench, building up relationships, back to what Kristen said, like finding those people, those your people, right, who have the same vision and same values as you. And I started really digging into that, working with Blue Bench and Rocky Mountain Victim Law Center and a whole bunch of different victim advocacy organizations. CCASA, Colorado Coalition Against Sex Assault, is another one. Now that this is getting to be a piece of awareness around restorative justice and transformative justice, and I will just name that there's a crime victim study, Voices study, that was done in Colorado a couple of years ago that says that a majority of crime victims actually don't call and report crime. And so what kind of justice are we leaving for those people who do not wish to engage the carceral system? And I would submit that we can offer other forms of justice, such as restorative justice, such as transformative justice. I was engaged by Blue Bench maybe about 9 months ago to handle, to facilitate a process between a person and the person who had caused harm for them in an interpersonal violence situation. We always, restorative justice and transformative justice, we always do co-facilitation, especially in high harm circumstances such as this. And so I have a co-facilitator, and she and I are slowly but surely meeting with this person who was harmed, the survivor, and their Blue Bench advocate, and helping them sort of chart out what justice could look like for them outside the carceral system. And this is because people don't engage it, and sometimes people aren't believed by the carceral system, right? So it goes both ways. I also really believe that we need to start leaning into mutual aid and community and collective care. And I was recently involved in a circumstance where I was trying to get support for a person who had been designated as a victim of domestic violence, and I called mental health first responders, and I couldn't get anyone to respond. They went to her house. We had pictures of suicidal ideations and actual attempts, and I couldn't get the cops to go in the house to check on her for a welfare check. I don't know what to do at that point, right? We need to start building up community resources and systems and structure so we can rely on one another to help each other, so that we can all sort of heal from this trauma that we are all collectively experiencing together.
Can I respond to the restorative justice piece just briefly? I think there are components of restorative justice that are incredibly effective, and I think the DV court kind of incorporate. The DV court is based upon a problem-solving court model, so like drug court and veterans court. It's intensive monitoring. It's as many resources as we can provide to perpetrators to be successful in the program, to go through counseling, to change their behavior and not reoffend. There are aspects of restorative justice that are incredibly dangerous in this area. Victim offender mediation presumes that both parties are equal in power. That is not the case in these cases. You cannot sit a DV victim down who has been battered for years and expect her to consider herself an equal to him. And I think you've got to be incredibly careful. I'll give you a great example. There was a judge here, he's now retired, It was actually in a divorce case, and Colorado law allows domestic violence victims to opt out of divorce mediation for exactly that reason. But this victim agreed to go through mediation. It was shuttle mediation. They weren't in the same room, which is a good first step. At the end of the mediation, the mediator came back to her room and said, "We had one last question, if you mind." And she's like, "Fine." He wants to know if he can get his shotgun. This is a shotgun held to her head 2 days before. What's the message there? We have to be very careful about putting victims in that position. So I agree, restorative justice has some great components, and it has some things that I think are very dangerous to victims in domestic violence cases.
With all due respect, Your Honor, I think that's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of restorative justice. We're not about creating people that are equal in that situation, not at all. It's about being very much victim-centered, survivor-centered, high-impact dialogue. We don't even call it victim-offender mediation anymore because of the misnomer around mediation. They're not on an equal playing field, not even close, right? Power was taken from the person who was harmed, and we need to rebalance that power. And we don't do that by saying they're both equal, right? We do that by empowering the survivor and giving them more choices and more voice and information and choices about how they proceed. And I would say, just to be very clear, high impact dialogue, which is a type of restorative justice process, is often akin to victim offender conferencing or victim offender dialogue. It is extremely, like the hallmark of it is that it is victim-centered. We are oriented 100% around the person who was harmed's needs and making sure that their needs are being honored and respected. If we cannot get their needs met, we're not going to put them in a situation where they're ever going to be in a dialogue face-to-face with the person who harmed them. And it's always up to them. It's always up to their choice. We never have to do direct dialogue. We can do support circles. We can do proxy processes, right? You never have to put someone in a situation they don't want to be in. Everything is voluntary and consensual, back to consent education and boundaries. And we make sure that that person wants to go forward. We're never putting someone in a situation they don't want to be in with restorative justice.
That you know of, and that's the problem, is that domestic violence is so different than every other crime because it's an ongoing relationship. And this is the problem with, prosecutors are not contacting victims. They contact them at the beginning, tell them their rights. They contact them before the trial and say, "Are you going to show up?" But we do know who is contacting them throughout that process. You don't know if this person is still being subjected to any kind of influence from this perpetrator. That's what makes domestic violence so complicated and so unique, is the fact that we are dealing with people who started out in a loving relationship. They, DV doesn't usually start out at the first date. It devolves over time. But I, as a prosecutor, I had victims come in and say, "I don't want the protection order. I don't want the no contact. I want him to be able to come home," and all that stuff. And I'm saying, no, the risk and lethality factors here are too high. And with all due respect to the victim, I have to try and protect that victim, and I'm going to object to vacating those things. The judge rules, however the judge rules. And I walk out of the courtroom with her, and she turns to me and says, "Thank you." So you don't know whether what she's saying is what she wants or whether it's a result of the pressure from a perpetrator. And we just don't know.
And that's why we work in cross collaboration, cross pollination, find our partners, right? If I was doing facilitating a domestic violence case, I would absolutely 100 million% have a domestic violence expert co-facilitating with me, right? Like, this is why, Connie is a restorative justice practitioner now. Let's find that alignment. Let's get those people trained up, cross-pollinate as much as we can, build up our collaborations as much as we can, because you're right, not any one of us knows and all are all-knowing, right? So let's work together so that and that's one of the reasons why we do co-facilitation and restorative justice, is I'm not going to be aware of everything. And I'm going to get triggered myself, right? Something that makes me remember my own childhood wounding might make me get triggered in a situation. That's why I have Connie on my side to pick that piece up when I'm not like fully present. And she can pick out the power and dynamic situations, right? That maybe I'm not as well versed in, right? That's why we work together.
You know, and I think you guys are right on track with one of the hardest parts of DV anyway. You know, when I first got in the field, the 21 years back, and started looking at it, I mentioned clearly what I did. So I went from a shelter program in California, and then I went to South Carolina and worked for the Domestic Abuse Center, which was for perpetrators. So I shifted really quick into this whole other facet, and understanding power and control, and understanding it in a different perspective coming from that quote perpetrator. They had it broke down back there, and actually there was something done really well that I've seen where they broke it down into, typical behavioral patterns that create the power and control. And we got the antisocial behavior patterns, and then we got the sociopath narcissistics. So, and then I'm going to back that one up with a task force in California. She said it perfect, and I'm not sure if she was with the defense attorney. I think she was, but she said to me, she said, what was the whole meeting? She said, we put a net out there to catch basically the lions and the monsters. And she says, what we've done is we've caught everything else in the midst of it. So too often we get the quote sociopaths, the ones that are the masochists, the ones that are going to cause obviously the red flag that's needed for too many times. Those are already skipping the system anyway. They're not showing back up for court. So we're going to go full circle back where restorative justice, because when I first got involved with that, this was way back. I was at Aurora, started getting educated a little bit more in it, but people said, I can't believe you're a victim advocate and you're actually thinking about restorative justice. And I says, well, you know what? These people are talking anyway. And you're right, Doug. Sometimes it's coercion, sometimes it's by power and control. But there are also some cases I've ran across where we can't box it all up over here. So I think that's, without getting too much into this whole thing, that's one thing in getting more into restorative justice, that it is and collaborative needs, but it is not just it is about victim empowerment. It is about putting that victim first. It's just we need to educate one another, communities, collaborative efforts of how we can make this work. Liz said it perfect. It's not a one-man team for anybody, any of us, you guys. We all need, you can't be doing this. It takes a team of people. One of the best task force I was in California. A judge was, we just had a great task force. It sounds like, Doug, you've been a part of a good one too. But the importance of that is huge. DHS needs to be involved. I mean, we got to have the whole system involved in this. And I'm going to do a positive thing of what I've seen in California or in Colorado is the fast track program. It's great. I mean, we've got that initial thing. They're doing what they need to do to get them in front of the judge. I really approve of, I think the fast track was great. They're moving quick on it. Utah was scary. Sometimes they do the emergency protection order and then they didn't have to show up court for 2 months, which is really scary. I won't go very far into that, but I commend Colorado. They're very proactive at that part, which does allow for collaborative efforts, options, people communicating. If we could enhance that a little bit more, and be collaborative. So I think there's places for both. There's points on both that's been said. It's perfect because you did that. I mean, yeah, I've seen it. And I've had victims tell me that after. I'm so glad that cop, they said, no, you're not going to see him because they're too scared to open up there and say, no, I don't want to do this.
Thank you, Connie. You mentioned education in there. One of the audience questions that we have today, and again, for those of us who have children or less than 21 years of age, as my son is getting ready to get married in a few months, right? How do we teach our children when social and emotional education is being taken out of school? So again, I'm going to open it up. How do we talk about it?
So at TESA, we are 5 days a week in all of our local schools. We're working with middle schoolers and high schoolers on healthy relationships, red flags, boundaries, consent. That is in all of our major districts in town. We're up in Teller County as well and out into Eastern El Paso. So we are working with our students. We are educating them. We are trying, as Kristen said, to try to stop that cycle, because in a lot of these districts, it is what the kids are seeing within their home. And so we're trying to meet them where they need to be in modeling that love and modeling that healthy relationship. We are fortunate to have funding both through local sources and through the state and nationally to be able to allow us to do that. And that program continues to grow. And we're seeing great things from that. I have young children myself, and that I'm hanging my hat on this as our program because I do see an importance of it. And we're already seeing the benefits of it and what kids are able to see from when they start our program to then when they finish it and what that looks like. We're not only in our schools, but we're also working within our local youth serving organizations. Every Friday morning, we're at the place. We're working with kids at the place and working with them through healthy relationships. We are partnering with, we're starting to try to go into the YMCAs, into our faith-based organizations and meeting those kids where they are and making sure that they are getting that prevention education, because that is the key to helping to stop this cycle of violence.
Another part of our program, thank you so much. So yes, it's definitely with the children. Are the families involved with that? Are the parents or things like that? Are those conversations being had with the parents?
They are. So the parents are invited to events as well. And then everything is done through the districts. It has to be done through an opt-in or opt-out. Parents have to allow them to attend it. But the parents are sent home all of the talking points, all of the follow-ups, so that they're able to then have those conversations at home with their students as well. And then we do open up sessions at the school, whether those are daytime, evening, mornings. We meet via parent organizations at the school and educate the parents as well so that they can have those follow-up conversations with their kids.
Thank you. As much as I appreciate that, I do see that, if you're a parent and you're going through these court processes and, you're having to worry about food on the table, you're having to work 2-3 jobs, being able to make those appointments at the school isn't always ideal. A different way that our program approaches this is that we have groups for parents, we have groups for offenders, we have groups for their survivors. We're using a lot of victim today when really we kind of frame it as surviving domestic violence. So we kind of work with the parents on that scope, but we also have a lot of activities for the families. We work hard with our lens of being Native. So we do a lot of our own traditional healing, a lot of our own outside activities. We try to make sure that some of these conversations are too harsh to have around the children. We understand that, but we like to incorporate as much as we can with our culture, because in our traditional knowledge, we do have the answers how to step away from this. This is not our traditional way of life. So I think it's just important that how we continue to build upon this, that, the parents are being able to model this, we're stepping away from these relationships, but our children can see this. They're seeing the changes that we're having in our conversations. We're seeing the different dynamics of how we even parent our children, getting away from kind of those.
And I think we're actually talking about 2 separate programs that we have, because we do the same as well. So within the survivors that we're working with that are receiving TESSA services, we have the parenting programs, the family programs, all of that, so that we are working with them to help them be able to model those for their children as well. The prevention piece that's in the schools, that is really casting a wide net. That is getting all of the youth in our community, not just those that TESSA serves through having come forward as being a survivor.
I have a little bit of a interesting thing for all of us to think about. When I was running my nonprofit and going into schools, going into healthcare facilities, going into a wide range of different places, one of the things that a lot of students, families, everyone, all different backgrounds have said is that the people who have came in previously don't look like me. And for a young Asian Pacific Islander woman going into a place and learning about DV, culture plays a big part, because culturally we're taught we don't talk about this outside the home. We don't talk about these issues. It's a private matter. Culturally, a lot of families don't talk about this because it's private. And one of the things that I also noticed when going into schools or even presenting at the African American Youth Leadership Conference is these kids were hungry to learn about these issues by people who look like them. And so one of the tricky things, and even my husband, he advocates with me, and he actually shares about how he formerly was abusive in past relationships, which that's a whole nother topic we'll save for another day. But one of the things that is so profound when he walks into a room is everyone's like, wow, you look so cool. You got tattoos, da, da, da. And it's relatable. But for him as a young man in high school, he was like, yeah, a white woman came into our school and taught us about relationships, but I wasn't listening because I didn't care what she had to say. So as advocates, we have to be mindful of that, is that every family is different, every community in our town is different. And we have to create this space where maybe other survivors and advocates can share their stories. To me, that was really profound, is that I was able to be an advocate and also teach people how to fight this issue, but also share my personal experiences of growing up with DV, but also now advocating and having a healthy relationship. What does that look like? So we're creating that connection with people, and we're changing the way that dialogue needs to be had. Another thing that I've noticed now being on the other side of advocacy is so many times agencies that provide education are very limited on what they can say. They can't go in and say things like FDV, and I didn't mean F, or have really open language about what happened to them. Whether, for me, I keep it real and I'll say the things that I went through so people can understand the severity that I could have absolutely lost my life, but I'm here and I'm educating you, and I'm gonna say whatever I gotta say to change the narrative. So many times as organizations, or even going back to the NCADV, I remember 11 years ago, I walked into their conference and I was the youngest person there, and everyone had a different idea of what they felt domestic violence was. And I was like, well, I'm gonna do everything opposite of what you all are doing, because here we are in 20, whatever the hell it was, and we still have this issue. So if we're still saying, stop domestic violence, break the silence, and it's not working, we have to do something different. We have to say different, excuse my language, shit, so people can listen to what we have to say, because this issue is serious. This issue is taking lives every single day, and it's affecting families. And so as advocates, we have to change the narrative on how we're even educating people so they can understand it, so it's digestible. Having very candid conversations like this are important, but this room needs to be filled with moms, dads, aunties, uncles, grandparents, business owners, whatever the case may be, so everyone understands that it's not just a woman's issue. It's not just this type of person's issue. It's everybody's issue. Because if I'm affected by it, it's going to affect my job. It's going to affect my family. It's going to affect my school. It's going to affect every aspect of my life. And so when we talk about education, we need to put this in unconventional places, not just in the schools. We need to put this in places like barbershops. We need to put this conversation in music studios. We need to put this conversation in places that aren't expected. So when you walk in and you hear this conversation that, let's be honest, no one wants to talk about DV. No one wants to hear about it. They think it's a whatever kind of issue, or it's your fault, or you deserved it, or whatever the case may be. Well, I'm gonna put it in your face, and I'm gonna say it to you as real as it can be, so you understand that you need to be a part of this issue alongside with me. And for me, and how I approached education, is I wanted to make it cool to talk about DV, and that was my tagline, is that I'm gonna say whatever I gotta say. I gotta speak your language. I gotta be cool. I gotta play the cool music, or whatever the case may be, or dress a certain way, so kids understand, like, yo, like, this issue matters to you and me, and together we can have a conversation, and together I'm not just educating you, so you guys opened up a door for me. So DV and that whole issue is really special to my heart, because I understand how it makes an impact on someone's life. But if we can come to the consensus that, hey, if we've been doing it the last 10, 20 years the same, and we're still seeing an increase in domestic violence, all right, let's open up a community conversation and see what we got to do different, because what we've been doing for all these years isn't working, and we need to do something different where we're going to be able to collaborate and provide opportunities for people to be a part of this issue. If victims or survivors or perpetrators are like, the judicial system isn't serving me in the way that I feel like I need to be served, then shit, let's talk. Sorry. We need to be real and give people the opportunity to say, hey, give us ideas, because apparently we're not doing it right. Let's do it better together.
Right. And I think just having the conversation, like you said, we cannot be embarrassed about it. It cannot be one of those things that you just shuffle under the rug, because that's the way we have always done it, right? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, one thing that Kristen said that I really want to highlight is her partner is helping educate people, right? We need men to step up and start having these conversations with each other. When one of your friends is derogatory towards women, call them out for it. Just call them out. talk, have that conversation, because this is insidious in locker rooms all across. I mean, middle school was hell for me because the boys didn't know how to behave. We need men to step up and be leaders and show other men how to behave and how to be truly in relation in a healthy way with one another.
Just to, another positive thing I've seen a little bit more in the Denver area than down here. There is some up in the Woodland Park area, but back to restorative justice is, one of the big issues we're all talking about here is communication and being allowed to talk. We went into a world of nobody talks. We just don't. We get talked at, social media. Literally sit around and talk in a group and listen and talk. So, a lot of that restorative justice programming going into schools is really allowing kids to have the opportunity to talk in circles, in safe places, and being able to really, okay, somebody's listening, somebody cares. And that's a whole nother avenue to that has just been incredible. There was Youth Transformation Center here. I think they're a little bit wobbly right now in the schools, but they were going in, and again, it's just that opportunity, kind of like what you're doing, Ann, from what we're talking about here. There's one thing when there's a presenter up in front, but if we can take, because really, even to do the presentations and not have a place for these kids to process after, some way in a comfortable way with a talking piece or another way, and that's what they do a lot with restorative justice, where, okay, somebody is listening, somebody is, and I can maybe, let out a little bit here. Now, we've got to be backed up in school systems, because if something comes out in the circle, okay, yeah, they just admitted that either DV is going on in their home, sexual abuse, something else, or sexual exploitation online. So where I'm going with, there is, I think, some proactive movements, and I do think those need to be increased, because I do think children need to know it's okay to talk. And I think that's a big part that they do, so.
And within our schools too, we do have student ambassador programs. So within each of the schools that we work in, we do have groups of students that have gone through or going through training with Tessa, so that they can be those ambassadors within their schools to also work with their school counselors or with their students, so that they are connecting with their peers on a level 2. And so that's really important to us as well.
That's great. Sounds like we're doing some really good things. We've got a few more minutes here for a few more questions, I think. One of those is, again, I don't think we should ever be ashamed to talk where I was always taught, my father, we don't talk about those things, right? We also don't talk about same-sex partners a lot as well, same-sex partner violence. It's a little smaller of a niche group, but do you feel that there's adequate support for victims of same-sex partner violence? And if not, what do we need to do to give them adequate support? No, I see a no over here on the left. Absolutely not. What do we need to do better then? I need to hear it.
When you give me the mic, I feel like I'm preaching. I remember back in San Diego, so when you said California, I was like, my heart. Back in San Diego, I remember talking to the Title IX officer at San Diego State University. And this individual shared with me, and this is her own personal experience, but she said, I don't know anyone in the LGBT community that hasn't been affected by trauma or domestic violence. And so that statement has stayed with me my entire advocacy career, because I can only imagine what it's like now. And that was probably 7 years ago. When we're thinking about the issue of DV and thinking about advocacy, one of the things that we have to understand at a very ground level is when we're asking for support, is the person on the other side of the support, whether it's the judicial system, police officers, whatever the case may be, do they understand me? Do they understand that I might be in a same-sex relationship? Are they going to judge me off top? Are they going to provide me services or feel like, you're good? I also remember a family that I had the honor of working with, that their daughter was killed by her girlfriend. And when one of the parents found out that she was in an abusive relationship, they were like, oh, well, how bad can it be? And really dismissing the fact that this was a serious situation. Later to find out that that young woman was going to be stabbed multiple times and not survive. To me, it goes back to the education about how can we raise awareness about this issue on several different levels, culturally, in different types of relationships as well, and also release this stigma that DV is a woman's issue, or it only happens to women, or, oh, if you're a man and this happens to you, ha ha for you, you must have deserved it, or whatever the case may be. And we laugh and we joke because we think, how can a man be abused? But it's all about the education on a very basic level. And even with the individuals that get training on DV, is what are your personal beliefs on the issue? Because just like many of you shared, I remember calling the police sometimes because I also felt like they're not going to help me. But also when the police did come, I will never forget this. When I was ready to leave that situation, they laughed and said, oh, I recognize that name. I recognize that perpetrator. He did da 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 da. And it was just a joke. And so for me as a survivor, it's like, dang, what are other people experiencing? Because if the person who's supposed to protect me feels like, oh, well, you should have did this, or you should have cooked that, or you should have, whatever the case may be. As a society, we have to understand this issue, that let's stop blaming people for whatever the situation may be. And let's start getting to the root. Let's start getting to the root of the problem and figure out how can we really fix this and address this issue.
I think to bring it back to the original question of same-sex domestic violence, a lot of times that we are kind of seeing, it is minimized and it's not something that is charged as DV versus an assault. And so I know for me, I'm not one to speak on this and have the answers and to provide that education, rather than ask that community to do that education piece for the law enforcement or for the advocates who need it. To call that community in, to make those referrals to those advocacy agencies, to the people who identified like that. It's not fair for us to speak on behalf that is not our situation, is not our background maybe. So thank you.
I am wholeheartly believe in the education piece. I worked as a consultant for a couple of years, traveled around the country doing trainings. But there's a barrier here, and that's attitude or bias, and education doesn't touch that. If you, and I've heard it from law enforcement for 35 years, not all law enforcement, and I think things have improved drastically, but you still, cops are proactive. Cops are people of action. They respond, they take action, they do what they're trained to do. They don't sit around and talk about it a lot. They respond and they do what they need to do. And I have talked to cops who can't get out of that mindset and say, why doesn't she just leave? Take action, get out of there, go do something, get away. And it's an anti-victim bias, because we all know at this table there's tons of barriers to leaving, economic, social, family, cultural. And I believe education is something we still need to hammer on. But I think we also need to understand that it exists not just in law enforcement. It exists it exists on the bench. It exists in the attorney. It exists in every profession. And it's unfortunate because when one of those people comes who is not empathetic to what that victim is going through, and basically their attitude, the logic goes like this: she could leave, she should leave. She didn't leave, so on some level, she's responsible. And that kind of victim blaming is still out there. You can educate till the cows come home. Some people are going to still hold that belief. So education doesn't solve everything. I think it increases communication, which we absolutely need more of, more coordination between all these different agencies. But and I don't know how to address that. I agree with you. If I hear a judge who's basically saying, well, you know, she kind of asked for it. It's like, no, she didn't ask. I'm going to call them out. And I don't know what else to do other than that to kind of address that bias. But, you know, there's been a lot of talk about inherent bias in the system in terms of cultural, ethnic, and racial markers, but I think it exists in this area too, and I think it's an inherent anti-victim bias. I'm not sure how to, I haven't figured out the answer yet, but other than just to speak to it when I hear it.
I was gonna say, the first thing is call it out. And I'm gonna say to the ladies in blue, right? Not the men in blue, but the ladies in blue, that's kind of difficult, especially when you see another, I would assume, someone who's victim blaming. Some of us aren't the best at standing up to authority, or someone who might be, first on the scene or whatever. Again, the police officer kind of thing is the dichotomy with you is very different. So I'm going to ask you, how do you deal with that biasness on site when you deal with it? Because it comes up.
Can I bring up one other quick thing? Is we keep talking about same-sex relationships, but I think it's a lot more broad than that we need to educate on, with transgender, with pronouns, with all of the other things. I think it's really important for us to also capture.
It is all of that. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Anybody want to comment?
I didn't really understand your question.
So my question is, when you come across that on scene, a bias, whether that's, again, the pronouns, she victim blaming, or the same-sex couples, it happens. It happens every day, right? Do you stand up to those people? Do you confront them? How do we stop the biasness with regards to domestic violence? Because it's there. Even if it's only a few in blue, the few in blue make the rest of you look bad.
So I'll just say, as far as domestic violence goes, no matter what our opinion may be as to whether the victim should have left before, I mean, that may be something that an officer can think, but we have a duty to act. And I can say that for our agency, we do a phenomenal job at this. If there is a crime that occurred, no matter what our opinion is, we act appropriately and professionally. And I know that any one of us, if we saw anything that was, anyone that was not behaving in line with that, then we would absolutely say something. I haven't encountered it, but I absolutely would.
I think our agency specifically does a lot of anti-bias training, but the law says if they're in an intimate relationship, it's regardless of same-sex, heterosexual, transgender, if there is a crime of domestic violence and probable cause is established, you shall make an arrest. So I think we do a lot of training on that, and I also agree. I haven't been in a situation where I've seen a bias like that, and I think with that training, and we're a younger department who I think we would all call each other out. I haven't seen that bias personally, but I would also say something.
I think that culture that you're talking about in law enforcement is more old school. Law enforcement's changed dramatically when it comes to that. There's not this that we don't confront. I think we very much would confront somebody that we thought was acting like that, no matter who it was. I'm very outspoken. So I have no problem confronting somebody that said that. In my 15 years of law enforcement, I have not come across that as well. I think our agency also does very good at anti-bias and saying, look at your biases and what you have, so that when you do approach your scene, our job is not to take a side. Our job is to just investigate what facts do we have. And that's what we come to the table with, is the facts. You can't arrest somebody based on bias because a judge is gonna throw that out. They want the facts. And if they're not there, they're not there. And that's what we come to. So yeah, I think law enforcement's changed a lot in that way. And I think us as female officers, we have no problem standing them up if we saw something wrong.
And I'm sorry, I just wanted to add on that law enforcement has been under so much scrutiny. I think that we all are very protective. There are good officers and we do good things. And I don't think we want any other officers to give us a bad name. So absolutely, we stand up and we want to protect our reputation of serving and protecting and doing the right thing.
Good officers want bad officers out as well.
Absolutely.
Can I just speak to, so one of my roles in the police department is I oversee the Victim Rights Act and making sure people are in compliance with that. The major tenet of that is people are treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. And that's very broad, right? That can be any way somebody's talked down to or whatever. And so we get a lot of, we're reading reports and we do see it. So I'm glad you all don't see it very often, but we do see it. And when we see it, it is addressed. And luckily, our department is very supportive of that and wants to fix that very quickly. So they do take action on it, but I don't want to pretend like it doesn't exist or it's not happening, because it is, but I think it's important to address.
Before you go, so do I understand the detectives dealing with it don't see it, but victims advocates see it? Is that what I hear?
Because we work more with patrol and we're the first responders, and there's so many, and like they said, they're very young. Law enforcement right now is very young, so people are learning, and I think that it's a lack of understanding and knowledge. I don't think they're doing it on purpose, but sometimes we do see it, and so it does need to be corrected, whether it's misgendering, whether it's lack of pronouns, whether it's whatever. It is a thing. It's not only domestic violence, it's across the board, and it does get addressed, but I didn't want to pretend like it's not a thing.
Understood. Thank you very much. Yes, Ms.
So I'm going to toot the horns of the sheriff's advocacy and the CSPD advocacies as a service provider for survivors of all of these issues. You know, if someone identifies that this was said, we would be able to contact our partners in those agencies, and then they would immediately address that appropriately. So we do really appreciate them. And I think there's kind of, in this conversation, there's a lot that these service providers don't work together. We're not working together. We just had Heather and Sarah at our office, within the last month. So these conversations are being had. We are vetting through other organizations, and we are being able to sit down at the same table and have these conversations. Also, Judge Miles, you are amazing. We appreciate you. Anytime we had a survivor in your court, we were like, okay, all of our stress as an advocate would be out the window because he is a very fair judge. So thank you.
I'm going to talk on a positive note on that. And you know what? It just came to me, Doug. I do remember there was a case that if I found out, because again, being a law enforcement advocate, not a DA advocate, I don't always know what happens on the other piece. Your name was brought up, and I commend you because I did hear some great, he's in Doug Miles' court. It's great. That'd be good. So, and I also want to echo that on a positive note of some things I have seen over the years too. And what the value of what you said just on biased on victims, just being somebody distinct bias, period, on victim. We had, why don't they leave? Why don't they do this? And the importance of the shift of that. The cases that I had and worked, whether it was the DA's office, whether it was an officer, whatever it was, I would watch this victim literally bloom when they were supported by, quote, the system. I mean, it was amazing. The one in California, and I had set up pretty much been with this victim for quite a while, and we talked about the dynamics, everything else, tried to do some empowerment. Officer came in and was with her for about 5-10 minutes, and I watched, and he said all the right things. Everything was perfect, it was great, and I watched her just literally look like, wow, okay, I'm not losing my mind. So to echo you, and then another case in El Paso, and a detective that picked up out of his invested interest in this victim, that her lethality of what could happen. Working with her, she told me when she finally left, she said, if it hadn't been for him, and then she mentioned me, but it hadn't been for, I'd probably be dead now. She'd been in so many different states. This guy just kept following her everywhere she went, and she was back enmeshed again and back enmeshed. So what I'm going to say, there is positive this. Is it individual? Yes. I mean, we got, let's put it, good and bad cops. There's good and bad everybody. So, but I want to echo, there are good. So there really are, and I do remember you, Doug, too, and I appreciate that. So everybody on that end, those that care, it does come through, and it's immense what it does for a victim survivor. So thank all of you.
Yeah, actually, that's great segue. I wanted to just bring this up, expand this beyond naming any one person and saying you need to do your work. We all need to do our work, right? Every single one of us needs to understand our trauma histories, our attachment situation from childhood, how we show up for shame. Do we hold ourselves accountable to the people that we've harmed? And how do we hold ourselves accountable? Does it look like a meaningful accountability process, or are we just saying, I'm sorry and moving on, right? This is work we all have to do around our own personal biases and how we show up for each other. And it's not just putting it on a single sector of our society. Every single one of us needs to be evaluating how we show up for each other, how our biases show up and how that impacts the decisions that we make. How we may feel uncomfortable around certain people, and maybe we need to examine that. Like, why? What is that about for us, right? And get deeper in our own learning and an awareness of ourselves and how we show up so that we can show up for all the people we're serving better. Yes, I just want to make sure that it's not just about police officers. This is about every single one of us in our culture.
That's right. It is. And thank you for that. So we're going to kind of wrap up on that, showing up for ourselves first. That's a great way to end. And then so we can show up for our community and help as well. So thank you, panelists. You have been truly amazing. We have this recorded as well. So one of the great things is, again, if you are watching this in the presence of your own home or at the library or wherever you are by yourself, we do hope that our panelists have given you some useful information. I know I've learned a lot, so thank you. I am going to ask you to see Mr. Dave Gardner with Studio 809. We are making this into our podcast, Making Democracy Work. So he will also publish links to all of your organizations. So those additional resources, and they're very easily available when somebody watches this next week or next year for whenever they want to. So we do appreciate that, and thank you so much for being here today.
All right, everyone. So here's what we've learned. We need more education in the community and within our police force. We need more coordination of the advocacy and the law enforcement together and amongst the advocacy groups themselves. We need to eliminate bias. We need to increase diversity. We need to continue to de-escalate these scenes. And we need to always remember that there are alternatives out there and that mental health is at the crux of much of this. This was a very interesting group to bring together. And one of the things I wanted to say to all law enforcement was initially we didn't get a lot of response. And then I spoke up and I said that we needed you all here. In the paper, it was reported that when a recent federal judge ruled on Colorado Springs Police Department, they said there was a deliberate and an indifferent part on the part of the city towards the process with whom the police officers come into contact. And coming from such a high level, I didn't want the police department and law enforcement to not engage in this conversation, because I think it shows you do care when you show up. You've got busy jobs, you've got complex situations, and you're in here in uniform, you're in here representing all the different departments of the broad law enforcement of Colorado Springs. So thank you for showing up, because that was the intent of this meeting, not to just have the advocates, but to also have the law enforcement, the judges, all of you here today. I have to say thank you to everyone. It was very interesting to try to keep my scrambled brain together, working with all of you. I feel like at the end of a movie, I've got so many credits, but I do want to thank some people like Fran Pilcher and the Blue Bench, Vinny Cervantes, Jenna Harper, Casey Ballinger, Pete and Lindley. You see how complex this was? Sergeant Hammond, Finding Our Voices, Kingdom Builders. I apologize to some of these groups. We started with a panel, we wanted to keep it 7, and as you see, it got bigger. So some people kind of got dropped in that process. We did not do that intentionally. This panel could have been 20 easily. So I just want to thank everyone who came today. And because it is my last event, and Shelley has had to put up with me, I am so glad to be stepping down from doing this sort of thing. And I want you all to know that there's an opening on the events committee for many people. We have a director, but join the committee, because these conversations are how our community gets better. So thank you all for coming.
All right, I think we're good. Thanks everybody for coming today. We appreciate you. And I'm sorry, if you're a panelist, stay for a picture. Do you want a real quick picture? If you can't be in the picture, I understand that. For those of